She was just a maid in a luxury hotel, invisible to the wealthy guests who walked past her every day. But one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. While cleaning a suite, her phone rang, and without hesitation, she answered. In flawless Dutch. A billionaire businessman sitting nearby froze. His eyes narrowed as he realized this woman, dressed in a maid's uniform, had just spoken a language only a handful of people in the room even understood. Intrigued, and a little suspicious, he demanded to see her after his meeting. What could a hotel maid possibly be hiding? He had no idea that this ordinary woman carried a secret that would shake his world. The luxury hotel towered over the city like a symbol of wealth itself. Its glass windows shimmered in the sunlight, and the marble-floored lobby echoed with the sounds of laughter, business deals, and clinking glasses. For most who entered, this place was a temporary palace, a world of comfort and privilege. But for Naomi Johnson, it was something else entirely. Her workplace, her battlefield, and sometimes her prison. Naomi was a black woman in her mid-30s, tall and graceful, though years of hard work had etched faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She had been a maid at the Grand Imperial Hotel for nearly 6 years, and in that time, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Guests seldom noticed her as she moved swiftly through the corridors with her cleaning cart, tidying rooms that would never truly belong to her. To them, she was just another face in the background, a shadow in a starched uniform. But Naomi was anything but ordinary. Every evening, once she hung up her uniform and slipped back into her modest apartment, she became someone else. Books lined her walls, dog-eared and worn, in at least 7 languages. Flashcards sat neatly stacked on her desk, filled with words. In Dutch, German, French, Italian, Arabic, Spanish, and even Japanese. She wasn't just studying, she was mastering. Naomi had a gift. Her mind was like a sponge, absorbing languages with astonishing ease. By the time she was a teenager, she was already fluent in 4. She had dreamed of becoming a translator, a diplomat, or even a professor. But life had other plans. Growing up in poverty, she had faced obstacles at every turn. A scholarship she once earned fell through when her mother fell ill, forcing Naomi to abandon her studies and work to support her family. Opportunities slipped away like sand through her fingers, and soon she found herself taking whatever job she could to survive. The hotel job was supposed to be temporary, just a way to pay the bills until she could get back on her feet. But temporary turned into years. Still, Naomi never gave up her secret ambition. Each morning she carried her books in her bag. Each night she studied long into the hours when the city grew quiet. For her, learning was freedom, but no one at the hotel knew. To the other staff, Naomi was diligent, quiet, and reliable. She never caused trouble, never spoke back, and always showed up early. To the guests, she was invisible. No one suspected the mind hidden behind the uniform, the brilliance that lived behind those tired eyes. Naomi preferred it that way. She had no reason to reveal her secret. Not yet. That was, until the day Mr. Khalid Al-Mansour, a wealthy Arab millionaire, arrived. The millionaire guest Khalid Al-Mansour was not the kind of man people ignored. When he entered the Grand Imperial, conversations stopped, heads turned. He carried himself with the kind of confidence born from vast wealth and global influence. Tall, immaculately dressed, and surrounded by an entourage of assistants, he was a man used to power and to being obeyed. Rumor spread quickly among the hotel staff that Al-Mansour was in town to close a massive international deal, one that would affect oil, shipping, and politics all at once. He was a man of connections, money, and sharp intellect. Many whispered that he was ruthless, too, that he had little patience for weakness. Naomi knew the type. She had seen countless businessmen like him pass through the hotel, men who believed that maids like her existed only to serve. She didn't resent them. She simply did her work and stayed out of their way. It was safer that way. But fate had other plans. The call. That afternoon, Naomi was cleaning the penthouse suite, humming softly under her breath. Her cart stood neatly by the door, and she moved gracefully through the room, straightening pillows and polishing mirrors. She thought she was alone. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Normally, she never answered personal calls at work, but this one made her heart skip. It was from her cousin in the Netherlands, a cousin who spoke only Dutch. Without hesitation, Naomi slipped the phone to her ear and answered. "Hello, hoe gaat het met je?" she said, her voice smooth, natural, perfect. Unbeknownst to her, Khalid Al-Mansour had stepped into the suite at that very moment. He froze, staring at the maid who stood with her back to him, speaking Dutch, as though she had been born in Amsterdam. At first, he thought he misheard. But as she continued, switching seamlessly between greetings and sentences, his intrigue grew. Dutch was not a language one simply picked up casually. It was complex, nuanced, and rarely spoken outside of its region. Khalid narrowed his eyes. Who was this woman? Why did a hotel maid, a cleaner, speak Dutch with such fluency? Naomi. Ended the call quickly, unaware of the eyes on her. When she turned, her breath caught in her throat. There he was, Khalid Al-Mansour himself, standing by the door, his gaze sharp and unyielding. For a moment, silence hung between them. Naomi's heart raced. Had she overstepped some unspoken rule? Would she be reported for using her phone during work hours? But instead of anger, Khalid's voice carried curiosity. "I did not expect to hear Dutch," he said slowly, studying her as though she were a puzzle. Naomi's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure whether to apologize, explain, or stay silent. Instinct told her to keep her secret close. But Khalid was not a man easily ignored. The invitation. Later that evening, a message spread among the staff. The millionaire wanted to see the maid. Naomi's name had been spoken by one of his assistants, and now she was being called to his private lounge. Panic set in. Naomi had never been singled out by a guest before, let alone someone as powerful as Khalid Al-Mansour. She worried she had done something wrong, that perhaps her job was on the line. What if he reported her to management? What if he accused her of spying, or worse? When she entered the lounge, her knees nearly buckled. Khalid sat in a leather chair, sipping tea, his sharp eyes fixed on her. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Naomi bowed her head respectfully, clutching her apron. He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated. Maids did not sit with millionaires. Maids served and left quietly. But Khalid insisted. And when Naomi finally lowered herself into the chair across from him, the world seemed to shift. Potential Khalid asked her questions, simple at first, but layered with intent. How long had she been working at the hotel? Where was she from? And finally, how did she know Dutch? Naomi tried to deflect, to remain humble. But Khalid pressed harder, testing her. At last, she admitted she spoke not just Dutch, but French, German, Spanish, Italian, and more. Her voice trembled as she spoke, afraid of how absurd it sounded, a hotel maid claiming mastery of multiple languages. But when Khalid challenged her, switching languages mid-sentence, Naomi answered flawlessly. With every word, his expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment. By the time the conversation ended, Khalid no longer looked at Naomi as a simple maid. He looked at her as something else entirely, a hidden gem buried beneath years of dust. And Naomi, though terrified, felt a strange stirring in her chest. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, truly seen her. She had no idea how drastically her life was about to change. The next morning, Naomi returned to work with trembling hands. She had spent most of the night awake, replaying the scene in her mind. The look in Khalid Al-Mansour's eyes had been unlike anything she had experienced before. Not contempt, not dismissal, but sharp curiosity, as though he had stumbled upon a rare discovery. For years, Naomi had lived under the radar, her brilliance kept hidden in the quiet corners of her modest apartment. She had been careful never to reveal too much of herself in a world that already judged her for the color of her skin, for her uniform, for the way society branded her as the help. But now, it felt as if the walls she had built so carefully were beginning to crack. Later that day, one of the hotel supervisors pulled Naomi aside. His expression was uneasy, as though he couldn't quite process the message he was delivering. "Mr. Al-Mansour has requested you again," he said hesitantly. He asked that you personally attend to his suite. Naomi's stomach flipped. This wasn't normal. Guests of Khalid's stature never remembered maids by name, let alone requested them specifically. She tried to protest, but the supervisor's sharp look silenced her. "Do not refuse him, Naomi. This is important." And so, with trembling hands, Naomi wheeled her cart back to the penthouse suite. When she entered, Khalid was waiting. No entourage, no assistants, just him, seated by the window, overlooking the glittering city below. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sit," he said. Naomi hesitated, but obeyed. He leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on her. "Tell me," he began slowly, "how many languages do you truly speak?" Her instinct was to shrink, to remain invisible. But there was something in his tone that demanded honesty. She swallowed hard. "9, she whispered. Khalid raised an eyebrow. "9? She nodded, listing them softly. English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Dutch, Arabic, Japanese, and a conversational level of Russian. She expected laughter, disbelief, maybe even anger at what might sound like boasting. Instead, Khalid's lips curved into a rare smile. "You are wasted here," he said. The words stunned her. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked at her and seen more than a maid. Tests and challenges over the next several days, Khalid found reasons to summon Naomi. At first, it was under the guise of needing assistance with his suite. Then, it became conversations, always conversations, each one in a different language. He would suddenly switch from French to Arabic, then from Arabic to Dutch, testing her. Naomi answered flawlessly, sometimes even catching him off guard, with her sharp wit and precise phrasing. One afternoon, he handed her a newspaper in German, asking her to summarize the article. Without hesitation, Naomi skimmed the text and recited its contents back to him in English, her tone calm and professional. Khalid leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. The more he tested her, the more Naomi's confidence grew. At first, she feared this was all some cruel trick, a powerful man amusing himself with the novelty of a multilingual maid. But over time, she began to see something else in his gaze. Respect. And yet, respect from a man like Khalid came at a price. Whispers among the staff. The hotel staff began to notice Naomi's unusual summons to the penthouse. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she was being scolded for mistakes. Others whispered darker things, that she had caught the millionaire's eye for reasons that had nothing to do with language. Naomi felt their stares in the break room, heard the hushed tones as she passed through the corridors. She wanted to scream the truth, that Khalid saw her as a mind, not an object, but she stayed silent. The last thing she needed was more attention. Still, the rumors weighed heavily on her. All her life, she had fought to be seen for her intelligence, and now, when she finally was, people assumed the worst. But Khalid seemed unaffected by the whispers. If anything, he only grew more insistent. The dinner invitation, one evening, as Naomi prepared to leave the hotel, one of Khalid's assistants approached her. "Mr. Al-Mansour requests your presence at dinner tonight," he said formally. Naomi froze. Dinner? The assistant nodded. He insists. Naomi's heart pounded. A maid did not dine with millionaires. It was unheard of, even inappropriate. Yet something inside her urged her to go. Perhaps this was the opportunity she had been waiting for all her life. That night, Naomi found herself seated at a private dining table in the hotel's exclusive restaurant. Khalid sat across from her, relaxed but sharp-eyed. Do you know why? I asked you here, he said, his voice low. Naomi shook her head. Because talent should not be wasted, he said simply. You speak 9 languages. Do you realize what that means in the world of business, diplomacy, negotiation? That is not a gift. That is power. Naomi's breath caught. No one had ever framed her abilities in such terms before. To her, languages had been a passion, a survival mechanism, a dream she thought had long since withered. But power, she had never dared think of it that way. Khalid studied her carefully. Tell me, Naomi, why are you still a maid? The question pierced her like a blade. Tears pricked her eyes unbidden. She wanted to tell him everything. About her mother's illness, about the lost scholarship, about the endless cycle of poverty that had trapped her in uniform. But her pride held her back. Instead, she simply whispered, because life did, not give me another choice. Khalid leaned forward. Then make one. You are not invisible. Not to me. The shift from that night on, Naomi's life began to change in subtle but undeniable ways. Khalid continued to test her, but now he also began to teach. He gave her books in Arabic economics, German diplomacy, French politics. He asked her to translate business documents, then challenged her interpretations, sharpening her skills further. Naomi began to realize that Khalid wasn't just curious about her. He was preparing her. For what, she wasn't sure. But the more time she spent under his watchful eye, the more she felt a dormant fire inside her begin to burn again. Her co-workers noticed the change. She moved with more confidence now, her head held higher. She no longer shrank into the background. Even when the rumors swirled, she walked past them with quiet dignity. But with change came danger. The skeptics not. Everyone was impressed by Naomi's sudden rise. A few hotel managers grew suspicious of her closeness to Khalid. They questioned why a maid was being invited into conversations that were clearly above her station. Some muttered that she was overstepping, that she was manipulating him. One senior manager, Mr. Collins, pulled her aside one afternoon. You're playing a dangerous game, he warned. Men like him. They don't see people like us as equals. Be careful. Naomi swallowed the words, but inside she bristled. For once in her life, someone was recognizing her value. Not as a servant, but as a person with intellect and skill. She refused to let fear rob her of this chance. The breaking point. The rising action came to a head during one of Khalid's meetings in the hotel. Several international businessmen had flown in, each representing different countries. The meeting was tense, high stakes, with millions of dollars on the line. Naomi was not supposed to be in the room. She had been delivering refreshments when she overheard 2 of the delegates whispering in Dutch, assuming no one around them could understand. Their words dripped with manipulation. They were planning to deceive Khalid, with hidden clauses in the contract. Naomi froze. Her heart pounded. She knew she should stay silent. She was a maid, not a negotiator. If she spoke up, she could lose everything. But if she didn't, Khalid would be betrayed. The decision tore at her, but something inside her snapped. For too long, she had been invisible. For too long, her voice had been silent. She cleared her throat, stepping forward. Mr. Al-Mansour, she said carefully, there is something you should know. Every head turned. The room went silent. Naomi's hands trembled, but her voice did not. She translated the Dutch conversation word for word, exposing the betrayal in front of everyone. The delegates' faces drained of color. Khalid's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening with fury. The meeting erupted in chaos, but there was no denying it. Naomi had just saved him from a catastrophic deal. In that moment, she ceased being a maid in Khalid's eyes. She was now something far greater. The hotel's grand conference hall had never been so tense. A long, polished oak table stretched across the room, with representatives from 5 countries seated stiffly around it. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and nervous sweat. Behind thick curtains, the hum of the city was muted, leaving only the sound of papers shuffling and pens tapping against notebooks. At the head of the table sat Khalid al-Mansour, his presence dominating the space without effort. He was the kind of man who rarely raised his voice yet commanded attention with the smallest shift of his expression. On his left sat his lawyers, and on his right, his closest advisors. And standing just behind him, trembling but determined, was Naomi. She should not have been there. A hotel maid in a room worth billions of dollars in negotiations? It was absurd. Yet Khalid had insisted after the Dutch incident days before. "You see what others do not," he had told her firmly. "Stay close." Now, as the meeting unfolded, Naomi could feel dozens of eyes burning into her. Some delegates looked at her with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. The hotel's senior managers, seated at the back as observers, exchanged sharp whispers, no doubt questioning why a woman in uniform had been brought into such a sacred circle. But Naomi stood tall. For once, she refused to shrink into the shadows. The Dutch delegates from earlier had returned, their smiles polished, their tone dripping with false charm. They presented revised contracts, each page covered in dense legal phrasing that even Khalid's team found difficult to unravel. Naomi's eyes darted across the documents as they were laid out. Though she was no lawyer, her knowledge of languages allowed her to notice inconsistencies others missed, subtle shifts in phrasing between the Dutch version of the agreement and the English translation. A missing word here, an added clause, there. Tiny details that could cost Khalid millions if overlooked. Her pulse raced. Should she speak up again? The last time she had saved him, but this was bigger. This was public. To interrupt now would mean humiliating powerful men in front of an entire room. If she was wrong, she would not only lose her job, but Khalid's trust as well. But Naomi had seen enough of the world to recognize deception, and she would not stand by while vultures picked at someone who, against all odds, had believed in her. The stand Naomi took a deep breath. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said, her voice cutting through the room. Every head turned. The room fell silent. Khalid's eyes flicked up to her, calm but expectant, as though he had been waiting for this. Naomi stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. She placed one hand on the contract. "There is a problem with this translation," she said. "The Dutch version states a permanent transfer of ownership, but the English version says temporary rights. They are not the same." A ripple of murmurs shot across the room. The Dutch delegates stiffened, their polished smiles cracking. One of them laughed sharply, his tone dismissive. "And who is this?" he sneered. "A maid? You bring a maid into international negotiations?" The insult stung, but Naomi did not flinch. She met his gaze with quiet fire. "Yes, a maid," she said firmly. "But also a linguist, and I understand exactly what you are trying to do." Gasps echoed around the room. The arrogance of the delegates faltered. They had assumed Naomi was invisible, unimportant. But now, she was exposing them in front of everyone. The turning point, Khalid leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Naomi. He did not intervene. He let her speak, let her own the moment. Naomi flipped through the pages with confidence, pointing out each discrepancy. Clauses that weakened Khalid's rights in one language while appearing harmless in another. Sentences deliberately mistranslated. to tilt the deal in their favor. With every revelation, the room grew hotter, more charged. The Dutch delegates' faces turned red, their charm unraveling. One slammed his hand on the table, shouting, "This is outrageous! She is lying!" But Khalid finally spoke then, his voice like steel. "Enough!" The single word silenced the room. He turned to Naomi. "Can you prove it?" Naomi's chest tightened. This was it, the test of her life. She nodded, then calmly took the Dutch contract and began translating key sections aloud into English. Each time she demonstrated the subtle differences, the hidden traps. By the time she finished, there was no denying it. She had caught them red-handed. The humiliation Khalid's lawyers tore into the delegates, their calm professionalism sharpened into fury. "You attempted to deceive our client," one declared. "This is fraud." The delegates tried to defend themselves, but the evidence was undeniable. The other businessmen around the table began to murmur angrily, disgusted at the deception. Their reputations were crumbling before their eyes, and at the center of it all stood Naomi, the maid who had dismantled an international scam with nothing but her knowledge and courage. Khalid's expression was unreadable, but his silence carried weight. Everyone in the room understood that the balance of power had shifted. Finally, he rose to his feet. "This meeting is over," he said coldly, "and our partnership with you ends here." The Dutch delegates stumbled to their feet, faces burning with shame, their arrogance stripped away. They left in silence, their downfall complete. Naomi's moment, when the room finally cleared, all eyes remained on Naomi. The hotel managers at the back were speechless, their earlier doubts now exposed as short-sightedness. Khalid's advisors regarded her with newfound respect, some even nodding in silent acknowledgement. Naomi, however, felt her knees weakening. She had done it, but at what cost? Would she be punished for overstepping? Would Khalid dismiss her now that her usefulness had ended? But then Khalid turned to her, and for the first time in front of everyone he smiled. "You just saved me from a disaster," he said simply. "And you did it with courage most people in this room could never muster." Naomi's throat tightened. For years, she had been invisible, overlooked, dismissed as nothing more than a uniform. And now, in one moment of bravery, she had changed. Not only Khalid's fate, but her own. The room erupted into applause, hesitant at first, then building in strength. Naomi stood frozen, overwhelmed. She had never imagined this: respect, recognition, dignity. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. The shift in power as the applause faded, Khalid placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder, a subtle but powerful gesture of acknowledgement. "You do not belong in the shadows," he said softly, though loud enough for others to hear. "You belong here, in the light." Those words, simple yet profound, marked the end of Naomi's old life. She was no longer just the maid who had been caught speaking Dutch in the penthouse. She was now the woman who had turned the tide of an international negotiation, who had exposed fraud with nothing but her brilliance and her courage. Her journey was not yet over, but the path ahead was forever changed. The conference hall, once heavy with tension, was now silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Papers lay scattered across the table, evidence of the chaos that had unfolded. But the real story was not in the contracts or the failed deal. The story was in Naomi, the woman who had gone from invisible to undeniable in a single afternoon. As the doors closed behind the disgraced delegates, Naomi stood frozen, unsure whether to breathe a sigh of relief or collapse into tears. For years she had moved like a shadow in these gilded halls, cleaning up after powerful men and women, ignored by those who believed their wealth made them untouchable. But today, the invisible had become unforgettable. Khalid, still standing, tall at the head of the table, finally turned toward her. The eyes of his advisors and the hotel staff followed, waiting for his judgment. "Naomi," he said, his voice calm but filled with weight. "Do you understand what you've done today, Herchi?" Throat tightened. She wanted to respond, but words stuck in her chest. How could she explain the years of self-doubt, of feeling small, of hiding her light because she believed no one would care? How could she explain that this was not just about saving a deal? It was about saving herself. I only did what was right, she whispered finally, lowering her gaze. But Khalid shook his head. No, you did what was brave. The following days unfolded like a dream. Naomi could scarcely believe she was living. News of the incident spread quickly through the hotel, whispered among staff, retold with awe by guests, even mentioned in local business papers. Hotel. Maid exposes international fraud, the headlines hinted. It was the kind of story people dismissed as rumor, too unlikely to be real, until they saw Naomi walking through the lobby, no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. For the first time, the hotel staff looked at her differently. The same managers who had rolled their eyes at her ambition now avoided her gaze, ashamed of their earlier dismissals. Some even offered awkward congratulations, though Naomi sensed their discomfort. It was not in their nature to respect someone they once considered beneath them. But Naomi no longer needed their validation. What mattered was something deeper. She had found her voice, and it could never again be silenced. Khalid's offer one evening, as Naomi finished her shift, Khalid summoned her to his private suite. The request alone made her heart race. She had only entered such rooms to clean, never as a guest, never as someone worthy of being invited. Inside, the suite glowed with warm light, the city skyline glittering beyond the windows. Khalid was seated by the window, sipping tea. He gestured for her to sit. "I owe you an explanation," he began. "When I heard you speaking Dutch, I suspected you were more than you seemed. But today, you proved that your gift is rare, and your courage rarer still." Naomi shifted nervously. "I don't know what to say. I never wanted recognition. I just wanted to survive. And yet," Khalid said, leaning forward, "you saved me. You saved millions, and in doing so you revealed who you truly are." He slid a folder across the table toward her. Naomi hesitated, then opened it. Inside were papers, not contracts of exploitation, but opportunity. Language programs, scholarships, letters of recommendation. "This is my offer," Khalid explained. "I want you to work for me, not as a maid, but as a cultural and linguistic advisor. You have a gift. It should not be wasted in shadows." Tears blurred Naomi's vision. For so long she had believed. Her past defined her. The girl who scrubbed floors, who spoke languages in silence because no one cared to listen. Now, for the first time, someone not only saw her, but invested in her future. The weight of the past yet. With opportunity came fear. That night, lying awake in her tiny apartment, Naomi thought of the sacrifices that had brought her here. Her mother's weary face as she worked double shifts, her own years of cleaning rooms while secretly memorizing vocabulary books, the humiliation of being dismissed as just the help. Part of her wondered if she deserved this new life. Could she step into the light without betraying where she came from? Could she embrace this opportunity without forgetting the struggles that shaped her? But then she remembered the looks on the delegates' faces when she exposed their lies. She remembered the applause that followed, the spark in her chest when she realized she had power, and she understood. This was not betrayal. This was triumph. Her story was not about abandoning her roots. It was about proving that roots can grow into something extraordinary, even when planted in hard soil. A new beginning. Weeks later, Naomi walked into a different hotel, not with a mop or cleaning cart, but with a briefcase in her hand. She wore a simple but elegant suit Khalid's team had helped her choose. Her posture was taller, her steps steadier. This time, she was not invisible. She was being introduced as Khalid's advisor, seated at the table rather than standing behind it. And though the room was filled with men in expensive suits and women with sharp eyes, Naomi no longer felt out of place. She had earned her seat. The journey ahead would not be easy. She knew there would be doubts, judgments, whispers behind her back. But she also knew she had faced worse and survived. And if she could dismantle fraud in front of a room full of millionaires, she could face anything. Impact beyond herself. But perhaps the most powerful part of Naomi's story was not what she gained. It was what she inspired. Back at the hotel where she once worked, whispers spread among the staff. The cleaners, the waiters, the bellhops, those who had always been told their place was beneath notice, now carried themselves a little taller. If Naomi could rise, why couldn't they? Young workers began enrolling in night classes, brushing up on their own hidden talents, daring to dream of something greater. Naomi had become more than a maid, more than an advisor. She had become a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. Naomi's reflection. One evening, months later, Naomi found herself walking past the same conference hall where everything had changed. The room was empty now, the polished table gleaming under soft lights. She stood at the doorway, remembering the day she had taken her first true stand. It felt like a lifetime ago. She was no longer the frightened maid who had hesitated to speak, terrified of the consequences. She was someone else now, someone who knew her worth, and as she stood there, a quiet smile touched her lips. She realized that the greatest victory was not the downfall of the corrupt delegates, nor the applause, nor even Khalid's offer. The greatest victory was that she had finally seen herself, truly seen herself, as someone capable, valuable, worthy. Final impact. Naomi's story spread further than she ever expected. Business circles whispered about the maid who saved millions, and universities highlighted her journey as a testament to resilience. She even received letters from young women, from immigrants, from people working invisible jobs, thanking her for showing them that their voices mattered. Naomi responded to each letter personally, never forgetting the weight of her visibility. She understood now that her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to anyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. And so, when people asked her how she did it, Naomi never spoke of luck or chance. She spoke of preparation, of courage, of the quiet power that comes from refusing to let others define your worth. Because sometimes, it only takes one voice, steady, clear, and unafraid, to change everything. Takeaway for the audience. Naomi's journey reminds us of something powerful. Greatness does not ask for permission to exist. It doesn't matter where you come from, what uniform you wear, or how others see you. What matters is what you carry inside, the gifts, the courage, and the willingness to rise when the moment demands it. Naomi was once a hotel maid who answered a phone call in Dutch. But she became the woman who shattered deception, changed lives, and stepped into the light of her own worth. And that is the impact no one can erase.